Here we go. Yeah, so good morning, good afternoon, and Happy New Year. I hope everybody's had an enjoyable holiday season and is ready to dive back into a year-long Lunch and Learn series that the consortium is putting on for 2024. We're still dedicating this series to the periodic review and comprehensive plan updates. So if you joined us last year for any part of our series, welcome back. And if you're new, like I mentioned previously, you can watch the recorded events. They go all the way back to explaining what the new state requirements are, House Bill 1110 and 1220. So you really get some good context if you go all the way back. But we are excited to kick this off, 2024 series. We're excited to have Katie Baker from the City of Puyallup here with us today. She's going to present an overview of Puyallup's comprehensive plan update strategy and priorities. Super excited for that. Before we dive into, I'm going to tell you a little bit about her in just a moment. I'll introduce myself briefly. My name is Casey Twiggs. I'm the membership coordinator for the Tacoma-Pierce County Affordable Housing Consortium, and I will be your host. So the consortium is a nonprofit membership-based agency that provides public education, advocacy, and support for the expansion of affordable housing in Pierce County. One way that we do this is by educating the public on the need for affordable housing by hosting these lunch and learns, things like special meetings and collecting data to share with the public. We also advocate at the state and local level for policies and funding that will support the creation of new affordable housing and bolster the work of our members. So altogether, our agency is made up of about 60 members, ranging from affordable housing developers, financiers, construction companies, architects, consultants, and individuals, all dedicated to advancing affordable housing in Pierce County. So that's a little bit about us. Now let me introduce our guest for this lunch hour, Katie Baker. Katie is the planning manager for the City of Puyallup and has been with the city since starting her planning career in 2008, or starting there as a planner in 2008. She has experience working in both current and long-range planning, and now also helps her team troubleshoot daily challenges and implement improvements in the permitting process. So she's worked on various plans for Puyallup, including active transportation plan and the housing action plan. This year is her second comp plan update with the city. Katie is a graduate of UW-Tacoma's Urban Studies program and also has a degree in social work. Outside of work, she likes to spend time walking her dogs, reading, and driving her daughter to dance classes. That's adorable. We're super excited to have you here today, and I will stop babbling just a moment. Some minor housekeeping. If you have a question or a comment, please feel free to type it into the chat. That's available for you. Raise your hand. We can pause and ask questions as we go along, or you can just hold your questions till the end. We are going to have appropriate time at the end for questions and discussion. One thing that we do ask is if you do have a live question you want to ask that's not going to be written in the chat, please take your camera off so that we can see you and maybe encourage a little bit more participation. So with that, I'm going to pass it along to Katie.
Great. Thanks, Casey. Thanks for that introduction. And thanks everyone who's attending today. Appreciate you being here and getting to know Puyallup a little bit better and hearing about what we're doing in our comp plan update. So let me get to sharing my screen here and we'll get started. And like Casey said, you can put comments in the chat. She will help me keep track of that. And if we don't get to them throughout the presentation, we'll certainly get to your comments at the end. So Casey, am I sharing the correct screen? Can you see my presentation?
To me.
Okay,
Yep.
excellent. Thank you. So yeah, like Casey said, I'll be going over Puyallup's comprehensive plan update, our periodic update, and kind of giving some background on what our strategies are for this update and our priorities, where we're at in the process, give you all kind of a baseline understanding of Puyallup and our existing conditions and our growth targets, and talk a bit about the community engagement work that we've done over the last 6 or so months, kind of where we're at now, which is moving forward, analyzing our land use alternatives, and then talk about potential amendments that we're considering. And this presentation will be really housing focused because that's kind of the membership here of attendees, but I'll touch a little bit on jobs and employment and that piece of things as well. And there'll be plenty of time at the end for questions. So first, our update strategy. So we did our last periodic update in 2015. At that time, we did a lot of community visioning. We felt that our comp plan was fairly out of date at that point. It just kind of felt old and not really just current with the community's priorities. So we did a lot of visioning at that time, but we wanted to recognizing how much has changed in the last 10 years, obviously the impacts of the pandemic, the affordable housing kind of crisis that we're in right now. We definitely wanted to touch back with the community and reassess the vision in the document, and obviously account for our growth targets that we need to be planning for out to 2044. Of course, the legislature has adopted a lot of legislation in the last couple of years that impacts cities and what we need to plan for. So we'll be reviewing and incorporating those changes as necessary. And we had our own city priorities that we wanted to address. So that actually corresponds pretty nicely with some of the legislative changes. Our city council had adopted a housing action plan back in September of 2021. And so one of the big priorities for the update prior to the legislative changes was to increase our housing options and implement a couple of the strategies from that housing action plan, specifically addressing middle housing. We also have 2 regional growth centers in the city, downtown and South Hill, as well as the River Road Corridor, which is kind of a local planning center. And so we knew we needed to take a look at those centers and particularly the regional growth centers, make sure we're being consistent with the Puget Sound Regional Council's criteria and expectation for center plans. And then one of the biggest pieces of this for us is looking at our development regulations, simplifying and streamlining where we can. This we really believe is going to help us both from a process and permitting standpoint, kind of our day-to-day operations, as well as that tie-in with affordable housing in particular, and just the more barriers we can reduce and address in our code, hopefully that will open the door for increased housing proposals in the city and getting those through our permit process in a more timely and efficient manner. So just wanted to touch on kind of the timeline of where we're at. We really dove into this update in about summer of last year. We hired a consultant team and they're helping us. Again, this is a pretty big lift for us with both the code and the comp plan piece. We're also doing an environmental impact statement. So last summer, we started with kind of the community outreach piece and scoping that EIS and doing some baseline existing conditions, which I'll get into in just a minute. Then we spent the fall and we're kind of just wrapping this part up right now, looking at our land use maps and really developing the alternatives of what we're looking at and what we're analyzing in that EIS. So we know there's a lot of changes to be made. And so we've developed a no action alternative and then 2 study alternatives, and I'll get into those details further in the presentation, but that's the work we've been doing over the last couple months with our Planning Commission and City Council. And we'll be doing that analysis over the next couple of months and having a community workshop. I think we're targeting March for that. Then as we move forward, we'll be developing the actual draft amendments to the plan itself and beginning the work on our development regulations and working through those amendments with our Planning Commission. The comprehensive plan piece will culminate, of course, adoption is required by December of this year. We do anticipate that the code amendments will extend beyond that, but the bulk of this comp plan work will be wrapped up by the end of the year. So we're counting down from a year now. It's moving quickly. So I wanted to kind of get this started by going over the existing conditions in Puyallup. I recognize you all have varying familiarities with the city of Puyallup. So just wanted to kind of give you the lay of the land and how that's informed where we go from here. So to start with, just a quick snapshot of what our 2044 growth targets are. We need to be planning for an additional 7,482 housing units and an additional 14,715 jobs. Of course, this presentation will focus more on the housing, but that job number is pretty big as well and will be a big focus of our update. As you can see from the graph here, this is the breakdown of those 7,482 housing units by income band. Most of our housing unit need is, and I think this is no surprise, is in those lower income categories. So everything from 0% to 80% AMI. That's where like a good chunk of these housing units that we need to be planning for and developing capacity for and encouraging through our policies and codes. That's where the focus of that work will be. So again, just to kind of set the stage of what we're looking at, this map is the city of Puyallup plus our urban growth boundary. This is our future land use map. The yellow that you see, kind of the sea of yellow on the map, is single family residential specifically. So multifamily is kind of the tan to brown tones that you see, but single family residential zones make up about, or I should say residential zones make up about 68% of the city's land use. 57% of the city's land use is single family residential. So that's, I think, quite obviously a big focus of our efforts over the next year, both in terms of, again, what the city's priorities are and some strategies we identified from our housing action plan, as well as what the state legislative changes now require. Just for some additional context, about 10% of the city's land area is commercially zoned, and then about 22% is either industrial or other uses. That includes, we have special designations for the fair, the fairgrounds, for medical areas, including and around Good Samaritan Hospital, as well as parks and other public facilities. So this might be a bit hard for people to read, but again, this is our zoning map. So just kind of that subset of the land use map we just looked at. Just to give you kind of an idea of what we allow in terms of middle housing, we do allow accessory dwelling units in all of our residential zones. We did some work about 5 years ago or so to increase our ADU options in the city. So we do allow both attached and detached units. Our council adopted an 80% fee reduction for accessory dwelling units. So that's a reduction of impact fees and system development fees. But we do recognize that we have some other fairly restrictive regulations still in place. We do have an owner occupancy requirement and other things that are kind of still a barrier. And now the state legislation requires that we take a look and remove those things from the code. Many of our single-family residential zones do allow for duplexes and triplexes, but we have quite a few barriers there as well. We have kind of a saturation requirement. There can only be so many of duplex and triplex units within a certain radius of a newly proposed unit. We also require a conditional use permit in some zones. So that's certainly something else we'll be taking a look at to just remove some of those barriers and make sure that we just don't have as many impediments to seeing more of those uses throughout our existing zones. And I'll also note that we don't have a fee simple townhome ordinance. A number of cities in the area do, I know. We do not, and that's been something that the development community and residents, I think, equally would like to see permitted throughout the city. So again, just taking a look at, kind of getting the lay of the land, seeing where our existing housing and employment density is in the city. This map shows housing density. So essentially, the darker the area, the more dense housing that's on that parcel or in that area. If you kind of know the lay of the land in Puyallup, we've got the valley floor in this area. So this is River Road here, kind of coming into town from Tacoma. This is 512 that kind of cuts northeast to southwest in the city. And then this would be up on the hill. We've got a lot of single family zoning up there, so fairly low density. And then we've got the Meridian Corridor going straight north-south through the center of the city. And it's in some of those areas that you see more density of existing housing units, also along East Main. So it was, pretty predictable for us when we looked at this map. These gaps you see in the middle are primarily commercial areas. So then on the next map, you'll see employment density, and it's almost the inverse, where we have more dense commercial areas in our South Hill Regional Growth Center, as well as in downtown, the River Road Corridor, and East Main, East Pioneer. So this was helpful for us in just kind of seeing where we have room to accommodate more growth. Our regional growth centers, as I said, downtown and South Hill. I'm actually going to go back to that prior map. As you can see from the housing map, there's almost no housing density in our South Hill Regional Growth Center, and it's less dense certainly in downtown as well. So that's something that we're really looking at. These regional growth centers are places not just for employment growth, but for housing growth as well. So how do we change our policies and reduce code barriers to see more housing density in particular in those areas? So this map gives a snapshot of our natural resources in the city, our critical areas, wetlands, steep slopes, floodplain. Just again, for some perspective, this kind of center band through the city east to west is, quite a significant steep slope. So it's important to have an understanding of this critical area context when we're thinking about what properties, what areas of the city are best to consider increased density. We have to make sure that those areas aren't encumbered by critical areas. So the last map we'll take a quick look at here is our buildable lands inventory. So just again, I know this is hard to read in any great detail, but essentially the kind of yellowish tan parcels, those are the vacant parcels in the city. So you'll see, we don't see very many of those. Not a lot of vacant land in Puyallup, but we have a lot of underutilized land. That's the blue parcels on the map. And we've got a lot of underutilized land in our two regional growth centers. So that was really helpful for us just to make sure that as we're planning for those areas, we actually have capacity to accommodate growth in both of those regional growth centers. And clearly there's other areas of the city as well. You see kind of the southwest section of the city that is, that's low density residential in its zoning designation. It's a bit constrained utility wise at this point, but we know that over time utilities will extend there and there's things that the city can do to prioritize that. So that area seems really ripe for increased housing intensity. So I just wanted to touch on some of the engagement work that we've been doing over the last few months. As I said, we started in the summer, went to a few different events in the city just to do some outreach and generate knowledge of the comp plan update and the process that we were in. We held a community workshop in September and then also opened an online survey for the month of September. And that's really where we got the bulk of our feedback. So I'll briefly walk through some of those results. This map here just shows where people who took the survey said they live. So we got a really great representation all across the city. at least in our residential areas, of people who engaged and took the survey. We covered a lot of different topics, but the one I'll touch on today is that we asked people to kind of place markers throughout the city. They had an online map to work with, and we asked them to place markers of where they would like to see our housing and employment growth targets be met as the city grows in the future. So I've got quite a few maps here, but I'll walk through these pretty quickly. So first we asked about single family and duplex homes, where people want to see those. You can see from this heat map that it's pretty well spread out throughout the city. Then we asked about triplex and fourplex units. So those get a little bit more concentrated, and primarily in areas where we already have some of those housing types. And then in asking about townhomes and smaller apartment buildings, again, we get a little more concentrated, but it's still pretty diffuse throughout the city and throughout what's existing single family residential zoning. So that was pretty encouraging that the community is open to seeing increased density even in what's currently our single family residential neighborhoods. So then we asked about larger apartment buildings, where those should be located. Those concentrations are in our regional growth centers, which is great. Lots of room for more housing units in those areas. And then we also see a concentration out in what we call the Shaw East Pioneer neighborhood. So it's kind of out on the east, northeast side of the city. We have a lot of residential, like low density residential in that area. But the community seems to be comfortable with the concept of increasing residential density there. We also asked about mixed use buildings, and that's pretty concentrated just in our downtown growth center, but some markers in South Hill as well. And then I'll just touch really quickly on the job component. So we asked about commercial. Predictably, that's the regional growth centers, the Meridian Corridor and the River Road Corridor. And then industrial, again, this is where we have existing industrial uses really on the north side of our city. And that's where people would like those uses to stay. So this is just helpful context for us in thinking about kind of that jobs housing balance, and are we placing and anticipating new housing growth and development in areas that are connected to and accessible to job growth in the city. So I want to kind of go over where we're at now and what the work we've been doing most recently. As I mentioned earlier, we're developing land use alternatives for studying and analyzing in our environmental impact statement, so that we really have a good understanding of what the impacts are of accommodating our growth targets and increasing the housing options throughout the city. So I'll go through these maps in more detail, but essentially we have a no action alternative where that's kind of a baseline study for us. So assuming nothing changes, what would that look like? And we know that likely it won't meet our jobs target, and it likely would kind of maybe just barely or not meet our housing target as well. So then we have two alternatives for study. One is a more focused growth approach, and one is a more distributed growth approach. And so I'll get a little more into the differences between those. We would anticipate in both of those alternatives that we're meeting our 2044 growth targets, but we do take a different approach in each one, and that includes with middle housing. So these next couple of maps, where I'll talk more about these alternatives, they show our city boundaries and zoning overlaid with our buildable lands. So I know you can't see this really at like a parcel scale, but essentially it gives us an idea of are these areas that we're targeting the growth to go? So that's our regional growth centers and then corridors and other areas. Do we actually have development potential in those areas? So do we have vacant parcels there? Do we have underdeveloped, underutilized parcels there? So in this focused growth approach, this is where we would study the vast majority of the growth going to our 2 regional growth centers, as well as some growth in our River Road corridor, and then also looking at the Meridian corridor, kind of connecting the fairgrounds with South Hill. And then that East Pioneer and Shaw corridor, or neighborhood intersection that I mentioned earlier, that was something that popped up really more from our community engagement and our survey. Staff hadn't previously identified that as an area that people would be comfortable seeing growth, but we're starting to see some development there already. And we heard pretty clearly from the community that they would expect to see more housing and more commercial development there. Then in our distributed growth approach, we would still anticipate our 2 regional growth centers accommodating quite a bit of our targets, but we'd also see really a more diffuse approach to how our city is growing. So we have a lot of, particularly downtown along West Stewart and West Pioneer. We have a lot of intersections in those areas that already have some small scale commercial, but it's mostly single family residential, kind of a moderate density single family, I would say. So in this approach, we would see an increase in housing options and density, as well as some neighborhood scale commercial. So again, that's a way to really connect the housing growth that we need to accommodate while putting that in areas where people would have access to resources, get their daily needs met, whether that's some smaller restaurants, coffee shops, small scale stores and other retail uses. So in this approach as well, the difference is in terms of middle housing, is that we would account for a wider variety of housing types in a wider number of zones and areas of the city. So in the focused growth approach, we would probably just look at meeting kind of the minimum standards that the state legislature has set out. And in this distributed growth approach, we would analyze the impacts of a greater variety of housing types. And I will say, just preliminarily, this distributed growth approach is something that our council is seems pretty supportive of. So it'll be interesting just to see once we really start to understand what all the impacts are to that and present that information to them where we land. I imagine we'll land with a land use map somewhere in the middle, a bit of a hybrid of both, but it was a really great conversation that we had with the council a few weeks ago to talk through these maps and these options. So then I just wanted to touch on kind of where we go from here, some of the potential amendments that the city's considering, and as well as how we are planning to incorporate strategies from our housing action plan that we adopted in 2021. So this is just a variation of the graph that I showed earlier that shows how many housing units we need to accommodate at each income band. As I mentioned before, a vast majority of this is under 80% AMI, and even about half, I think, is under 50% AMI. So that was really eye-opening for the city to start to see those numbers and think about how the strategies that we were already considering might help address those lower income bands and what else we need to be thinking about. So first, I'll just touch on our housing action plan and the strategies that we're incorporating into this comprehensive plan and development code work. When council adopted this plan in 2021, they were very excited to begin implementing some of the strategies. Recently, they adopted changes to our MFTE program, multifamily tax exemption program. So council expanded where that incentive could be utilized and strengthened our displacement policies and made a few other changes. So that was something that was in our housing action plan that we were able to start working on right away. But a few other strategies we knew would be tied to this periodic update. So this first strategy, look at rezoning areas that are near transit and other amenities to facilitate higher density and more diverse housing types. This was also helpful in development of the maps that I just walked through with you, those land use alternatives. So we want to make sure that, as you can see, so this map here, these are our transit. The dots are the transit stops. So these are our transit routes in the city. And then the kind of tannish orange is a 5-minute walk shed and the gray is a 10-minute walk shed. You can see that there's huge parts of the city that are really not accessible to transit at this time. So knowing that, Pierce Transit isn't able to add very many new routes. There's no new routes coming to the city of Puyallup anytime soon. So we want to make sure that we are focusing growth, and particularly multifamily housing growth, in areas that are accessible to transit. So it's helping, to inform those maps and focus on a more corridor and center oriented approach. The other strategy that we're incorporating that we're implementing is revising our existing zoning code. I think I mentioned that in conjunction with the comp plan update, we're also looking at basically the entirety of our zoning code and subdivision code. So this strategy in particular is really more connected to those development regulations rather than the comp plan policy. We understand that thinking about housing, it's not necessarily about our capacity to meet the targets. We really already have housing capacity in the city. It's really about reducing barriers in our code to actually see that housing be built and see a variety of housing types. So this is a big focus as well. And thankfully, those two strategies nicely tie in with a lot of what the legislature has told us that cities now need to accommodate. So just to wrap up here, some of the additional policy considerations that we'll be talking about with our Planning Commission and City Council over the next few months are changes to policies. So that's additional policies that can better increase affordable housing options in the city, encourage more equitable development, and hopefully address displacement. We also want to, obviously take a look at the policies that we have in our comp plan. We know we have a number of vague and subjective policies that talk about existing character of the city and compatibility. And we want to make sure that those policies aren't prohibiting kind of our ability to approve and be open to new development types and more variety of housing options. As I mentioned, our development regulations are a big piece of all of this. So we'll be considering everything from fee reductions, reducing how many housing types and uses require conditional use permits, looking at displacement mitigation in our code, and universal design practices, just to name a few. We have quite a long list of other regulation changes we'll be looking at. And then one other piece of the puzzle that's not really directly related to this work, but I think will come out of and after this update work that we're doing is making sure that we're looking at funding options and really developing key partnerships to encourage affordable housing. So the City of Puyallup, we don't have a housing development arm of the city. So we know that we really need to develop those partnerships with organizations and agencies that do that work, that build those affordable housing units to help us meet those the targets for that, under 50% median income band. So that will be a big piece of the work too. I think at least to the extent that I'm working on it, it'll come after this comp plan work. But we definitely want to be talking with our council about kind of the full package of things that we'll want to take a look at. So with that, I just want to say thank you for your time today, for being here to listen to this. I hope you have some questions. I'm here able to answer any questions that you have. If you'd like more information on our update, this QR code, you should be able to scan that, and that'll take you to our comp plan website. If that doesn't work for you, we have the link on the page here. And as Casey said, you'll get the presentation after the meeting. So you can take a look at it then. So with that, I will close this.
Yeah, and we have plenty of time for discussion or questions. So if anybody has a question, go ahead and take yourself off mute or write it in the chat if you'd like. And the questions can be about anything. It doesn't have to be about Puyallup. It could be about just comp plans in general. The reason we're doing this is because we're just trying to, get everybody on the same page because it is just so complicated. Go ahead, Mary.
Hi, Casey, and hi, Katie. I was interested in or interested to hear about those three different options, and especially the third option, which would kind of create some employment opportunities in neighborhoods. So I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about, like, are you receiving positive feedback on that? How is that being received by the community and by Council and Planning Commission?
Yeah, so the conversations we've had at this point are pretty high level, and the feedback has been fairly positive. I think there's a lot of people, that live in these predominantly residential neighborhoods that then have to, get on collector and arterial streets and battle traffic to get to any commercial uses. And there is a thought that they'd love to see some smaller scale commercial uses closer to their neighborhoods. So that's pretty positive. I think when we actually start developing the code, the rubber meets the road, and we'll see if people still feel positively about it. But, I think there's a scaling issue, right? We're not talking, big box stores or even downtown style development. This is like really, pretty small size limited neighborhood commercial. So yeah,
Yeah.
pretty positive so far.
Cool. Thanks, Katie.
I have a quick little question, kind of piggybacking off of that. And I've been asking this question, I guess, to every jurisdiction, because it's just such a weird one to incorporate, but it makes so much sense. Food, access to food. If we're like the increased density and we've got all these plans, everybody's, bracing for more development, more density. In the case that I live in Tacoma, and if we've got more housing developments going up in Hilltop, which we do, which are going to be great, I would have expected some food alternatives or adding food options. Is Puyallup having that conversation at all? It doesn't really seem like that's a conversation anybody's really having.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's so funny you bring this up. It actually kind of popped into my head as I was looking over my presentation again this morning, and thinking about the neighborhood serving commercial. Food is a difficult one to deal with, just kind of from the market standpoint. I don't know a whole lot, but grocery stores are generally a certain size. You don't see a lot of like really small grocery stores anymore. Those generally don't exist. You need a certain density, for a grocery store to really be successful. And we don't have a lot of control over that as a city, right? But the city of Puyallup, we have lost a couple of grocery stores in city limits since I've been with the city, which has been the last 15 years or so. And I don't know, it's an interesting question. It's a difficult one to kind of wrap our arms around. It's something we're kind of thinking about, but I'm not quite sure how we tackle it. I would hope that with some of the neighborhood scale commercial, that we would get a few more like corner store type options. But again, I know those are challenging from a market standpoint. So I'm not quite sure how we tackle it. It's something that's kind of, in the back of my mind, but haven't had those conversations yet.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions that we've got? And yeah, and if you've got any questions about this series in general, welcome to ask those as well. If you're new to the Lunch and Learn series at AHC, you know, it can be a little confusing because we, I don't know, for some other reasons, maybe it's confusing, but if you have any questions about how this is run, what we're planning, or why we're doing this, or anything like that, those questions are welcome as well. But if we don't have any more questions, you can get in contact with me. I will put my email here in the chat. Katie, do you want to put your email in the chat if people want to
Yeah,
get a hold of you as well?
absolutely.
It's up to you. Oh, so for the link for the recording, as long as you've got your email, as long as you registered with your email, I've captured that. So everyone who's attended, anyone that's even RSVP'd and couldn't make it, I'm gonna send an email out with the slides, the recording, and some of the resources that were mentioned throughout the presentation, the housing action plan, and maybe some of the code stuff as well. And if you, for some reason, didn't register, which you probably wouldn't be in here if you didn't register, but if there's for some reason you want me to send the information to anyone else, just feel free to email me at Casey@TPCAHC. Katie, it looks like you've got a question from
Great.
Tammy.
Yeah. Okay, it looks like Tammy's sharing contact information, so I appreciate that.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and information about the Pierce Transit Runner, which I know is a newly launched program. I have not dove very far into what that entails, but there's a link in there. So if any of you are interested, that's a great resource too. Thanks, Tammy.
I saved that for myself as well to go and check out. So yeah, thanks, Tammy. It's great. I guess if we don't have any other comments or questions or anything like that, we're gonna wrap up for the day. I wish I could tell you exactly what we're gonna be doing and when the next Lunch and Learn is gonna be, but I don't. So we're gonna probably start with the second series or second event in the series in February. And like I said, if you are not signed up for our newsletter and our emails, please do that on our website, or just email me directly and I'll throw you in there so that you get those invites. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I've got for today. But I appreciate everybody who participated and showed up. Thank you for everybody that continues to show up. Your interest and your participation is really valuable to our community and the topics that we discuss. So I thank you and have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time.